Welcome to the Rosenfeld Review. I'm Lou Rosenfeld. I am delighted to have my guest today, Maria Rosala, the Director of Research at the Nielsen Norman Group. If you haven't heard of Maria, you've probably heard of the Nielsen Norman Group. And Maria, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
You know, you have a pretty interesting role, as well as an interesting backstory coming from the
Mm.
UK, where you worked for the Home Office and uh, did some pretty interesting and influential research projects in that context. Now you're over on this side of the pond at
Yeah.
Nielsen Norman. Um, Interesting enough that I was so happy to be introduced to you by Laura Klein, who we have in common, who's working in Nielsen Norman now. Is one of our authors, friend of
He is,
mine.
yeah.
And we connected because I was looking for someone, turned out to be you, to be a host of a session devoted to research repositories
Hmm.
that's coming up at the Advancing Research 2026 conference. So, folks, let me just background this for you. Maria is one of four hosts for different categories of software that UXR people care about. We're going to be focusing on these categories on March 12th. It's a third day of advancing research. It is the inaugural UXR Tool Summit. And we're doing this because we think there's an important gap that needs to be filled in terms of having good conversations, meaningful conversations between the people who create and sell UXR tools and the people who buy them. So at that day on March 12th, we're going to start off with a panel of buyers where we're going to have John Temple, recently of IBM, moderate a conversation with Kaylee Dankner, who's a research ops lead at LinkedIn, Lauren Galenter, who does the same at Elsevier, and Bruce Falk, who's not a UXR guy at all, but I know him as a master of procurement at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. They're going to be talking about all the challenges around evaluating, understanding how to purchase, pricing, uh, onboarding, setting up, dealing with privacy and security issues, all the fun stuff that the buyers need to think about. And then we're going to have these four categories. We're going to have Erin Weigel host a session on testing and experimentation tools where vendors will tell you what they're up to, where they're going, and you can ask questions and so forth. Then we're going to have Caroline Jarrett do the same thing for survey tools. Then Maria, our guest today, is going to be covering research repositories. And then Kate Towsley will wrap it up with participant recruitment and management tools. What a great day. So we're going to talk a little bit about the research repository side with Maria in a moment. But Maria, let's first of all get to what you're up to at Nielsen Norman. Like the idea of being the director of research at a place that's sort of like, foundational
Mm.
home of UX research in many respects kind of blows my mind. It's like you're the
Mm.
you're the research director of research directors. You're like the top of the pyramid or something. What does it mean to be the director of research at Nielsen Norman Group?
Yeah, great question. And I think you're the first person that's said that it's blown your mind that there is a director of research at Nielsen Norman Group. So my role is obviously we have a team of researchers. We're the people that do research on topics that are important to practitioners, whether it's topics on specific technologies or user interfaces, learning a little bit about what works and doesn't work. We publish that research in articles and reports historically, through to researching like trends that are happening in the industry. So, like how are people creating repositories is an example of a topic, and like what are the challenges there, and how do they encourage adoption and get people in the repositories and using it. So that's something I studied a couple of years ago, and of course we can get into some of the challenges there. So we have a lot of people doing a lot of different research, and my role is to ensure that the research that we do aligns with the needs of our audience, and that also the research that we do is done well. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not to say that people are conducting poor research, but it's always good to have a second pair of eyes on a research study proposal or a protocol, to make sure that you're not missing any glaring things. I certainly like to have another researcher take a look over a complex study design if I'm going to be running a research study that I really especially since we're going to be publishing this to, thousands of people might be reading our articles and, taking that information and applying it in their practice. So it's really important that the research that we do is, fairly rigorous, and is thought out well and is analyzed well. And so, the day-to-day work is everything from, speaking to researchers who are thinking about a research study that they'd like to run, possibly because a lot of our researchers also teach.
Mm-hmm.
So they have, a kind of collection of courses that they're experts in or specialists in. And often they're identifying areas where the audience is asking questions about certain topics that maybe they feel like we're a bit light on this, or we haven't researched this in a while. Has it changed in the industry? And so I'll be having those conversations with them to understand, what is it that they'd like to research? Do we think it's valuable for them to spend the time and the resources doing that? We're a small team, so we need to make sure that resources are used well. And then, the training aspect, we do have junior researchers too, right? We do hire interns, and then they become junior researchers, and those researchers need coaching as they, explore new methods or new spaces. So that element is there too. And of course, the last element here is I also do research operations for Nielsen Norman Group. So everything from like our policies, right, about how we kind of conduct research, what tools we use, how we use those tools. I do a little bit of procurement myself on a
Mm-hmm.
very small scale. So there's a lot of logistics as well, that I'm sort of, responsible for. So
It's a
that's kind of my
lot.
role in a nutshell. Yeah, it's a
It's a lot,
lot.
but I mean, it's not surprising, but it's great to know that at a place like Nielsen Norman, that the white papers that you're producing or the published research is going through a more rigorous process, more review than you might see certainly in a lot of other settings. Um, what I start to wonder is and don't feel free to say you don't really want to answer this one, but like how do you feel the quality of the research that you produce compares to, let's say, um, a more general brand name type of business analyst firm like a Gartner or a Forrester? Do you feel like
Mhm.
they get research the same way that people who are more focused on UXR research might?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to I haven't worked in those organizations, so I can't speak to their process or like how they kind of design and conduct the research. But I feel like our research is, people ask all the time, are your articles peer reviewed? And no, not by an external party. And that's why I think my role is very important. And we have a few quite senior people in the organization who've done research for a very long time and are also in academia who are research leads. So they, are coaches and they review research proposals, research study plans, and make sure that, research are on the right track. I think because we're very small, we do have a lot of oversight of the research that we're doing, which is a blessing.
Hmm.
Also, it means that we're very busy as well. But I think our research is really about, we've specialized mostly in qualitative research, and it's mostly about getting really sort of practical recommendations and findings for people to actually use in the industry. So rather than these big broad brush studies that are usually quantitative and kind of benchmark things and report on large scale trends. We try and stay a little bit closer to the ground, and try and really research things that have an impact in within teams, and within current design sort of this current design sphere. So I think the research looks quite different as a result.
I want to talk about the scale of the research that you're, well, not the scale of the studies necessarily, but the quantity of research that's coming out of a place like Nielsen Norman, and how that compares to your experience in the public sector,
Mm.
where maybe the scale is higher. I mean, you
Mm.
were at the home office where you're dealing with issues related to an audience of what, 55 million, 60 million now in the UK. Um, did you find that you had your hands in a higher volume of research in that setting? And did those lessons mean a lot for you as you moved to the setting you're in now at Nielsen Norman?
Absolutely. To both of those questions. I work within the Home Office, for people who are unfamiliar with the UK government. You can read a little bit about the ethos and the work there. But the UK government, at least most departments, and especially the UK Digital Service, is known for having quite high UX maturity. So I joined in 2013, and worked there for 5 years. And this was my first sort of stint in user experience. And so I learned everything about, before I joined Nielsen Norman Group through working there. And I was incredibly lucky because, of course, it was a fairly high UX maturity organization, or at least the people I was working with were experts. They'd spent a lot of time in industry. I worked with some fantastic contractors. I believe Caroline Jarrett we didn't work closely together, but she crossed paths, or at least she was working within some of those government departments, and she was part of the UK government community. And so there was a real emphasis on, you know, doing research regularly, and we were all embedded within product teams. I'm using scare quotes here because they're not really product teams. We would call them like service teams. Some of these weren't, they were more government services as opposed to like, digital products that we were trying to sell. But we had agile, like teams were working in agile, or various forms of agile. And we were embedded there within the team, doing research every sprint, right? Or every other
Mm-hmm.
week. We were testing prototypes, going out and speaking to users who are affected by the problem that we were trying to solve. And we had service assessments. So these are things that can block you from getting funding to proceed to the next level. So you have to kind of go and show that you've done your work, you've done user research. The design is informed by users. People would go through and critique the design and say, "Why have you designed it like that?" And you need to have a good reason, right? And the good reason would be, well, we tested this alternative and it didn't work very well because people, mistook X for Y, or, something along those lines. So that was my exposure, tons of studies, but very light, right? In terms of
Mm-hmm.
like the design of them. We didn't spend weeks coming up with a study plan and, really finessing
If I understand, also there you were essentially in-house,
in-house.
and
Yes.
then so that may be another interesting contrast with what you're doing
Mm.
now.
Yeah. And then I moved over to Nielsen Norman Group, and part of the work that I was doing was also consulting. So I was working with clients, helping them with their problems and helping do research for them. So as a consultant, as well as doing this sort of independent research that I mentioned earlier, which informs articles, reports, videos, courses, all of that fun stuff. So the research was very, very different, right? I'm not working with a team so much these days. We do some internal research, of course, right? We have our own website, we have our own services, and so we do internal research that informs that at Nielsen Norman Group. But the vast majority of the research that we do is going to be consumed by people I'm not going to be speaking to, right, or working with, and so that's very different. And yeah, definitely the scale is different. The kind of thought that we pour into the research is a little bit different. So I've seen both sides of the coin, which is nice. It's really helpful as well when teaching practitioners because I understand, the kind of stresses and pressures that they have doing research in some of those environments.
Well, you've seen both sides of a few coins, it sounds like. I would imagine one of the common threads in all those settings is the fact that you probably find that you're drowning in the output.
Mm,
And that may be a good segue to talking about research
mhm.
repositories. We're going to do that, folks, after the break. You're listening to the Rosenfeld Review. We're talking with Maria Rosala, and we'll be right back. I'm going to give you 5 reasons you should be using the Rosenverse. First one, where else are you going to find 100 events that you can attend for free every year, 2 a week, about product management, product design, and UX design, plus a highly engaged Slack-based community of over 13,000 of your peers. What else are you going to find in the Rosenverse? You'll find hundreds and hundreds of recordings of conference presentations and community session recordings, all in one place from a single search browse interface. And behind those hundreds of recordings are hundreds of experts, people who have advanced the field, people who are your peers who are doing interesting new things, all in one place. Why else should you use the Rosenverse? We've been advancing the field of UX since 2005. You're going to find the most advanced content on such topics as design operations and program management, UX research, and a host of other topics from climate UX to civic design to how designers can work better in product organizations. Lastly, you've been trusting our content since we started back in 2005. Whether it's our books, our conferences, our community sessions, well, we think you're going to trust the way we've brought those all together so that you can spend less time searching and browsing and more time learning and benefiting. I hope you'll try out the Rosenverse, and I hope you'll consider upgrading to a gold paid membership because it brings you a lot more. Not only do you have access to hundreds and hundreds of recorded conference presentations, but you also get access to the Rosenbot, which is a ChatGPT 4 level chatbot that we've been training on all of our content, including our growing collection of nearly 60 books and counting. It's all there, it's all great content, and the Rosenbot is a cutting-edge way to get at it. You can try the gold membership out with a trial for 2 weeks. Give it a try. Hope you like it. Welcome back to the Rosenfeld Review. We are talking with Maria Rosala, Director of Research at the Nielsen Norman Group and host of the Research Repositories session on March 12th at the UXR Tool Summit at Advancing Research 2026. Well, that's a mouthful. And that's just a little bit of what you do. But we were going to get into this topic of research repositories. You are going to be asking vendors questions about that topic and hearing questions from our audience on March 12th. And hopefully we're going to have a meaningful conversation between the vendors and the buyers. And Maria will be there to help make that happen. So, Maria, you've been in a position where research repositories could be very valuable in a lot of different settings, ranging from home office, where maybe light studies, but a lot of them, and in a distributed environment, where you were in-house versus what you're doing now at Nielsen Norman, where you're doing research operations, and it's just, deeper studies, it's probably fewer of them. But there's always that need to manage the the wisdom that's hopefully emerging from
Mhm.
these studies. What does a research repository ideally do for an organization? Let me put it that way.
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, at its core, it's about ensuring that research can be consumed by not just the immediate team that are doing it, right, to inform some of the kind of key decisions that they're trying to make, but that it could potentially benefit others who might be thinking about that problem in a slightly different lens. And this was a really common thing. You mentioned the UK government and there being a lot of different studies there. There were lots of different teams working on essentially the same kind of problem, but with a slightly different twist. And resulted in sometimes many different tools that essentially did the same thing. And so those teams could really benefit from speaking to one another and knowing that there was another team working on this type of problem and that they had done some research before and already learned some lessons about what works and doesn't work, or what people typically might need in that particular context. For example, like just to make this more concrete, there were tons of products that were helping with document storage and document retrieval at the Home Office, but just in different business
Mm-hmm.
departments, business units, and in slightly different contexts. But there were a lot of similarities with what users might need from a solution like that. And so, if those teams had been able to know that they existed and could learn from each other a little bit more quickly than somebody in common saying, hey, there's this team over there and they've already done research on this, you should go check that out. It would have been a lot more efficient for the organization, and those teams could have benefited from research that they possibly haven't had time, don't have time to do, or didn't think to do as well. So it's really about kind of surfacing knowledge that we're accumulating in the organization, right? Knowledge kind of accumulates over time. There becomes stronger evidence for certain things from lots of different research activities and different data inputs, even. And so a repository is about making that, surfacing that, and making it easy for people to kind of find and consume.
So
So
I
I
do
see
have a
that
question
as.
about that concept of surfacing. It was on my mind as well. Um, is that something a tool can do, or is that something that you need either uh, an individual or a small group who's tasked with that uh, big picture perspective of looking at different activities around an organization when it comes to research and saying, hey, you folks are doing something that's very similar to those folks. Let me get you together and look at each other's work in the repository. Or is it even something that really needs to be handled at an organizational level where there's a culture of curiosity? People want to look at what's been done rather than necessarily figure it out on their own all the time. So I'm just
Yeah.
wondering where you draw these lines around what you can expect the tool to do versus organizational structure and organizational culture
Mm.
outside the tool that uses the tool.
Right. I think it's a mix of both. So the tool is a tool, right? It's helping you to do something. And but you need the people to have the right ideas about how to use it in such a way that creates the right sort of environment. It's no good at people being super curious and really wanting to, consume stuff, but it's very difficult for them to consume it or to find it in the first place or to discover it, right? You don't know what you don't know. So, um, you know, typing something into a repository and getting something is you having a kind of an idea that you want to know something about this unknown. So it's a sort of known unknown. But there are things that, you could benefit from learning. You just didn't think to articulate it. So a tool can help with that, right? It can kind of spot, are you working in these particular areas? Let me surface something that might be relevant, as well as people, right? And I think people are going to play an important role and continue to play an important role, regardless of AI implementations, in curating that and drawing those kind of connections and supporting people learning from one another within the organization, as well as through, something that is a structured artifact like a research repository.
Is there, uh, I don't know if any of the vendors of research repositories are really pursuing this right now, but do you see any ways of making these tools really strong at surfacing and suggesting to humans what they may be interested in, the things that they don't know that they don't know?
Mm. I mean, I think there are ways right now, some tools are surfacing just things that are like new, right, in the
Mm-hmm.
repository. So they're already tackling that in quite a good way, usually, especially, a tool that you buy. Often when you launch the tool and open it up, there might be certain features that sort of show you the latest published things. Or alternatively, you can set that up yourself. So you can sometimes customize, say, the homepage where people land when they log in to feature like latest published things in a project or in a folder. So that is possible, but that's the latest, right? And so if you miss the boat on that, there might be something from 2 years ago that's still really relevant today. And right now, this is where people are sort of doing that work. If there is somebody who's sort of like the librarian or the kind of architect of the repository and is sort of managing it, they may be doing this work manually right now, or just it just they just happen to know that a team is working on this thing. They can see it, happening in a project space, and so they may be, actively reaching out and sharing additional things, or they may get a request from that team to say, "Have we got anything already, on this particular problem, or with these users, or regarding this UI element, or something along those lines?" So I think AI can be really helpful here. It needs to be plugged in to know like what people are working on in order for it to be able to recommend
Yeah.
those things.
It
And a
seems
lot of
like
these
there's a,
tools, sort of, yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say a lot of these tools are sort of standalone tools. They have integrations,
Mm-hmm.
but this really isn't that kind of ecosystem yet where all work is being done within one space. And so, an AI algorithm can kind of learn from, oh, this team is setting up a study on X, and I already know I have these things. Maybe I can feed it to them.
There's so much to unpack there. One is this issue. Let's work backwards. You just mentioned ecosystem, and I know there's a lot of consolidation in the UXR tools space, and there's promise there. But we've seen this before in other industries where the consolidation, the M&A, doesn't necessarily lead to effective integration and interoperability. So let's say a prayer for
Mm,
the M&A gods to maybe look a little more kindly on the UXR space. But more importantly, the AI question about where it has value, it seems that maybe one area that some of the repository vendors should be considering is not only being very clear about supporting that individual curator or librarian,
mhm,
but very naturally building out, what do you call them, skills in AI, where it's an encoding of an individual's knowledge
mhm,
so it can be reused. That would be the person you probably want to do that with. That's a critical function. Not that you
mhm.
would take it away from that curator, you'd still need the curator, but boy, if that role could be augmented with AI, it seems like that would
Yeah.
be very powerful. Another application that seems promising with AI and repositories is, AI works best with narrow domains where
Mhm,
where structures and semantics are just more constrained and
mhm,
less ambivalent. And wow, I mean, like it seems like in UXR, just in terms of the methods that are being applied, and maybe the industries are being applied to, or the vertical spaces, you have a lot of ways of narrowing the studies to connect to other studies, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
mhm, mhm.
Wow, this is a field study or an ethnographic study, and it was in financial services. You should probably know about that if you're doing one. That seems like a pretty straightforward start at
Yeah.
surfacing?
Yeah. To your first point around these tools really needing to design around the librarian or the architect or the person who is doing that curation element, I think that's incredibly important. And I feel like some of the tools that I've experimented with have really not taken that into account whatsoever. It's I think that maybe there's this naive belief that that role will just go away if we have AI, and I really don't think that's the case. You need someone to be able to ensure that the right things are being scraped and put out there, and that searches that people are doing are leading to promising results, and sort of that sort of nice sort of cleanup and work to kind of create a solid taxonomy that the AI can kind of use is so important. And I haven't really seen many tools really have great features around that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely certainly very important. I think, yeah, to your point around AI being, really useful as this, connecting you. So it's beyond just sharing the knowledge, but also, connecting you with other people in large organizations, with other people or other teams that are learning certain things. Whether it's around a method that maybe someone is using, or alternatively, what they're learning is can be a really promising avenue. One thing I would love to see from some of these tools is that they can, surface things that are not just attitudinal data or like text, because a lot of the research that we do is very behavioral. So like, what is someone doing on an interface? What was tested in this particular design? And right now, researchers are having to write everything and say, this thing was tested, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it would be beneficial if, as part of, if there is a search facility or a function within these repositories that are powered by AI, that you could also kind of understand, well, which area of our website was tested in this particular study? Is this a usability study? Is it an ethnographic piece of research? And maybe, these recordings contain, information about what someone is doing on this particular, set of suite of products. So those kinds of things are often lost right now in a search using AI, because it's mostly looking at transcripts or like the written text within, say, insight cards or reports. And I think we're missing a little bit from that right now.
Well, one takeaway I have from that is I think you are suggesting that repositories will deliver more value if they focus on unlocking the studies themselves rather than the atomic evidence.
Mm,
And it's probably benefits to both, but maybe they're a little
yeah.
too focused on the latter and not enough on the former.
Mm.
We're going to have to unfortunately wrap up. We're running low on time. I want to first thank you, but don't go anywhere. I want to let everyone know again, Maria Rosala, Director of Research at Nielsen Norman Group, is going to be hosting the discussion where we on March 12th at the Advancing Research 2026 conference, where we get into research repositories, where we have vendors talk about what they're up to and entertain your questions and Maria's as well. Before you go, Maria, I can't let you leave without you bringing us a gift. What did you bring us?
So I have brought you a really excellent book. It's not necessarily a UX book, but it is a book that's very relevant to research, and in particular analysis and the sort of value you bring as a human sort of engaging with research data. And this book is written by I think retired professor now of I think he was in theatre, which is kind of interesting. But this book is called The Coding Manual for Qualitative Researchers, and it is a very, very interesting book that looks at like how we sort of derive meaning and insights from data. It goes into a lot of detail, but it really has sort of changed my view on what research and analysis and synthesis actually is, and really kind of delves into like the creativity that we kind of bring to this activity. It's not just this sort of formal crunching of data. It's about, really sort of seeing connections, seeing the big picture, thinking about things from slightly different angles, exploring really interesting connections or contradictions in the data. And he sort of gives you a lot of different sort of methods to kind of unlock that creativity in the process. So I thought it was a very refreshing book and a really good exposition on analysis. So that's my
That's
gift.
fantastic. Thank you. I think, we want to figure out all kinds of ways and incentives to get researchers to keep on reading. Love it. Maria, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. And I'm looking forward to seeing you on March 12th.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure.
Hey, it's Lou. Thank you for listening to the latest Rosenfeld Review podcast. I really appreciate it. I would love to hear from you. And if you want to pop me an email, lou@rosenfeldmedia.com, tell me what you thought. Better yet, leave me the hell alone and post a review on your favorite podcast platform. Please feed the algorithm. It really does make a difference. We want to get the word out. If you like the word, give us a hand. And while I'm asking you for favors, don't forget, buy books. Support your favorite local independent publisher. We happen to be one, rosenfeldmedia.com. All those great UX books are there. So, thanks again.